I'm going to call this meeting to order, and we have the minutes of October 6th and October 7th.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of October 6th and October 7th.
I'll second them.
Okay, any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We have the minutes of October 14th, a special meeting.
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes of October 14th.
I'll second them.
It's a tie. Any discussion?
Who seconded it?
I guess I did.
David.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, we have bills for payment, 9, and the payroll, 9P.
I'll make a motion to approve bills for payment 9 and 9P.
I'll second it.
Okay, any discussion? The bills for payment number 9 is for $81,484.85. And that went to fuel, health insurance, payroll transfers, our monthly rescue fee, our monthly sheriff's fee, the second payment of the county tax, and then also our quarterly payment to the Wyndham Solid Waste Management District, and then a little over $52,000 went to our bond repayment for the gravel pit, our share of the gravel pit. So, any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, let's see. We've invited Sheriff Mark Anderson to our meeting today. We had a discussion about the Vermont Criminal Justice Training, the fair and impartial policing policy a couple weeks ago. We wanted to get your take on it. And there might be questions about traffic on Kipling Road or a few other issues that we have. And in the interest of keeping things flowing, we wanted to have you take the floor under our visitors and public comment section.
Great, thank you.
So,
Should I sit here?
sure.
What's best for sound?
Wherever you're comfortable.
I'm comfortable anywhere.
Okay, great.
So, good evening. Mark Anderson, Wyndham County Sheriff. Some familiar faces and some new faces. So, briefly, a little bit about me. I'm from Brattleboro, born and raised, graduated from BUHS. Worked with the Sheriff's Office since 2004, where I started as part-time deputy and dispatcher, and became sheriff in 2019 after a variety of different things within the department. So I've been in this conversation for a while. Some of this I'm going to speak about just from my personal experience because, well, I don't really have the data points to support it, but if you want them, I can pull them. We started on discussions around what we currently refer to as biased policing, whether that's implicit or explicit bias, fair and impartial policing, and just general conversations having to do with the treatment of people different than myself. We started that probably about 2006 to 2007. Actually 2007 to 2008, excuse me, under my predecessor Keith Clark. It was before there was a curriculum, before there was a manual. I shouldn't say before there was a curriculum, before there was a designated curriculum from the Vermont Criminal Justice Training Council, the overseeing body for all Vermont law enforcement, before there was a mainstream attention. And we have been working on this with local partners, contracted trainers, and subject matter experts since then. We've been doing that because it fits the values of Wyndham County. Now, I didn't know it at the time that that's why we're doing it, and there was a journey for me as well, from a new deputy through the experience of life and dealing with people from all different walks and talks. In 2011, we adopted what we call our fair and impartial policing policy. Now, this predated many agencies that were doing that. It predated any mandate from the legislature. It was really a pioneer move, especially amongst law enforcement in Vermont. And I believe I brought a copy of the law that required it, but without reading it. Sometime around, I believe 2014, the legislature wrote a law. It's under Title 20, I believe Section 2366, which required law enforcement agencies to start capturing what we call today as the traffic stop and race data. What this data was looking to do is capture if explicit or implicit bias was occurring during traffic stops. Or in layman's terms, are deputies or police officers in the state of Vermont selectively enforcing laws against people based on their skin color? Now, if we look to today, you can find many articles, many studies, many conversations about this. There's some agencies that do have fantastic data. There's some agencies that have a lot of work to do. We can talk about the data itself and venture down an entirely bigger conversation. I will save that for today. But I'm proud to say that our department has always maintained a very respectable data set in terms of exhibiting no indicators of implicit or explicit bias. Now, it's not to say that this is a perfect tool. It's not to say that we are immune to it happening, because that is not the case. But our data does show that the efforts that we have started back in the aughts have certainly shown intentional action towards things that we do target, such as traffic safety issues, speed, impaired driving, and distracted driving. Those also happen to be the top 3 killers of people in Windham County, which is why we've targeted those 3 areas of driving behaviors. In 2018, the legislature mandated that the Vermont Criminal Justice Training Council establish a model policy for fair and impartial policing. At that point, they also required that the academy, the Vermont Police Academy, provide, I believe it's on even years, a mandated fair and impartial policing course to all Vermont law enforcement. To maintain that a law enforcement certification in the state of Vermont, you have to attend this training every, I believe it's 2 years right now. It alternates with domestic violence training. So we do one on 1 year and the other on the other. There are some constraints to that mandate because my department started this training many years ago and other departments are starting more recently. It's kind of like high school and college. There comes a point where you need higher levels of training, but because we are, it's the law of averages, we are held back by people who need to come forward. So, in 2018, the model policy was created. That model policy serves in one of 2 functions. First function is that it serves as a floor policy for all law enforcement agencies if they do not adopt a fair and impartial policing policy. The second is it requires all agencies to conform to the standards of the model policy. So while we had a policy since 2011, our policy then had to update to what the statewide policy said. Now, one of the things that our policy ignored from 2011, if I recall correctly, we didn't talk about border crossing, because we don't share an international border in Windham County. It was recently brought to my attention we are within 100 miles of the ocean. So technically there's a sliver of Brattleboro, I think, that would fall within the federal government's jurisdiction for enforcing immigration, though we've never seen it operationally. So anyways, that was excluded and ultimately brought into our policy when mandated in 2018. Or whenever that language was added. I'm not sure the exact year for that. At that time, when the model policy was created, there were some issues. Now, going back to how the policy was created, the Vermont Criminal Justice Training Council was tasked to develop this policy in association with, I believe it was with Migrant Justice, the Human Rights Commission, and the Attorney General's office. Now, these were the stakeholders in the conversation that were charged with the responsibility, but they invited in groups across the state and stakeholders across the state. And there was the basic concept of negotiation that occurs with anything with people with varying and differing viewpoints. The resulting outcome of that was that the model policy actually had some conflicts in it, which then and this happens from time to time, when we tried to operationalize it, well, if we do option A, we're violating this part, and if we do option B, we're violating that part. So Sheriff Clark, looking at the model policy and understanding the intent of where we're trying to get, he crafted, and I believe he was the first to craft a policy that that was not the model policy. Right, wrong, or indifferent, just sharing the history. His intent was to make sure that this was something that when a deputy reads it, they understand the underlying goals, and effectuate it, which is what policy should do. That policy was submitted to the Attorney General's office, as was required by the law, for review to make sure it was in compliance with the baseline requirements of the policy, and it was ultimately accepted. It was the first in the state. There were groups who were involved in the discussion who I don't want to identify their feelings on the matter, but I'm going to say that they took offense, and they approached Sheriff Clark to say, why didn't you adopt this policy? And there was contention there. Needless to say, as time went on, other agencies actually started running into some of the problems of conflict in the model policy. Not a surprise, it was a new policy, it wasn't tested. And one of the things that we talk about when we draft policy is what's the effect that the language will have? What are the unintended consequences? And then what are the unintended consequences of change? So other agencies, including the Vermont State Police, started looking at some of these issues and said, we don't quite like the format. So the state police, and with great credit to them, just because of the nature of their model, they actually took the model policy and broke it into 3. They go as far as talking about interpreter services beyond what the model describes. They've been translating into 3 or 4 different languages onto their website. I mean, they're bringing a lot of really great resources into it. But they're also an organization of 300 to 500 people, depending on how you want to slice them up. And so they have different perspectives and viewpoints and takes on how to effectuate that. Whereas we have a department of 20 to 30 people, and we have a more community-based perspective on what do the people of Windham County want. The Vermont Criminal Justice Training Council, along with the Attorney General's Office and the Human Rights Commission, I believe, meet every other year to review this policy and update it and allow it to reflect these updates, bringing stakeholders into the conversation. So that happened, my understanding is it happened first in 2017, where they drafted it. It was accepted in 2018. It happened again in 2020 and is currently under review for another one. There was, I believe, revisions as a lot of agencies started stepping away from the model policy because of these conflicts that existed. With the agency stepping away, there's some who went right, some who went left, some who went in the middle. What directions those mean is irrelevant, just that there started to become some diverse and broader stakeholder groups that were brought into the conversation in addition to the leading organizations, where we started to get different flavors. And so there's what we call the Winooski policy. There's what there's the state police policy and many others. There's a variety of groups locally. There's a group called No Mas Pali Negra, which basically stands for No More Immigration Police, I believe is what it stands for. And they are, I believe, a committee or a subsection of Migrant Justice. And so they've approached my office saying, we want these updates. I believe that you have them in front of you, but there's 5 points in which they are asking for. The main question that I really had to start off with, and this was in 2019, was what's the problem we are trying to solve? My understanding is that it's not about any action of my department. There's no evidence of any immigration enforcement or supporting federal immigration authorities. In fact, in the last 8 years, which is as far back as I can search in our current computer, we've never interacted in an investigatory capacity with ICE or Border Patrol. But as far as I understand, this isn't based off of any identifiable instance with a Windham County deputy. This is because of how people within the immigrant community, within undocumented worker communities who are contributing and participating in our society view the policy and what their concern could happen. Now in 2019 when I took office, there was a different federal administration and they were using certain tactics that the federal government frequently does to cause compliance with federal law. It's usually around money. The reason why we have a speed limit on the interstate that says 65 miles an hour is because they give highway dollars. The reason why we have a .08 DUI limit is because they give highway dollars. And if you go away from their plan, they threaten or actually take it back. So talking about the Winooski policy, I spoke with the chief of the Winooski Police Department who said that he had federal funding withheld from his department because the city of Winooski had adopted this policy. Now under the current presidential administration, many of these lawsuits that had been previously filed in the various courts of jurisdiction have been withdrawn. The tactic of threatening what we'll refer to as sanctuary cities with removing funding for doing certain things has generally been withdrawn. There is not an attack on immigrant communities. And so the question becomes, where does this policy lie and how do we approach it? If I missed this part, I'm gonna say it, and if I said it already, I apologize for repeating myself. So one of the goals of updating my policy was, what I'll say is words matter. People read my policy, they say, what does that mean? How could this affect me and how could this hurt me? It's not our intent to remove undocumented workers from Dummerston or Windham County. Now, people might look at me and say, why would the police not want to do that? They're here illegally, it's unlawful, whatever. Well, first off, immigration law is the sole domain of the federal government. As you know, I contract with you to provide services, and you will not find immigration as anywhere as part of the scope of our contract. You don't pay me to do it. I follow my contract, so we're not doing it. If you came to me and said, hey, we want you to start doing that, well, I'm not going to enter that into my contract because I don't want the headaches of immigration enforcement. Needless to say, there's a variety of objective reasons from a law enforcement perspective we don't want to do it as well. When crime happens in our community, it doesn't matter whether you're a documented worker, a child, a stay-at-home mom, a stay-at-home dad, somebody working third shift, crime happens. If there's a loss of trust within the police and the victim of that crime feels that they are going to get deported by going to the police, crimes will continue happening. We want the victim to trust us and say, we're going to come forward and share this with the understanding that they're not going to be in a detention facility in Texas and on a plane, train, or whatever the method of transportation is back to a country after the various judicial processes. Now, over the last 3 years, we've even seen some terrible things on television of how people are treated and policies that were determined by the federal government. They're offensive. They're upsetting, but they're nothing that we, the Windham County Sheriff's Department, control. So as we started considering the Winooski policy, and even just pieces of the Winooski policy, there, back to what I said, this is an issue about language as opposed to action. And my impression and interpretation of the various people I've met with is that we're all in the same place morally and philosophically. It's how do we get there? And so right now I'm on this track and they're on this track and they don't align. So the...
Can I interrupt you?
Sure.
It sounds a little bit to me like they do align though, based on what what you just have said about like how the department works. I guess I just feel confused why your intention is not to close those loopholes if everything you're saying is it's not our intention to do this, we haven't done it, why not move forward and sign those?
Great question. We're not sure it's legal. In fact, some of it is illegal. So,
Is that based on the 1373?
and state statute.
Okay.
So, the
Excuse me, Sheriff, are you referring to immigration enforcement?
I am.
That's the federal government's job and not state or local police's job.
Correct.
The way we conduct the meeting is if you'd like to speak, we'll wait until he's finished. And then you'll have an opportunity to ask questions. You'll ask the board for the floor, and then you'll be able to ask questions.
Got it.
So I'm going to respond to your question, if you'll allow me a little latitude here.
Please.
So I want to fill in just the remainder of the brief history that's left. So in 2020, the country underwent some significant changes for a variety of different reasons, both within the policing profession and within health communities and schools and everywhere else. And one of the legislative changes that came out of 2020 is that the Vermont Criminal Justice Training Council became the Vermont Criminal Justice Council. Now it sounds like a name change, but it also meant a rule change which has to go through the state's Administrative Procedures Act and is currently under revision. It created entire structural change. It doubled the size of the council, which was primarily law enforcement professionals and government stakeholders. It's now equally represented by citizens and appointees of the governor. So now law enforcement doesn't have a dominant voice in this council, but rather I'll say an equal voice, if not a minority voice. So those are some of the changes that happened, but it also caused some delays in the process for the council's fair and impartial policing policy update to happen. The other part of this is that in discussing these policies, there's discussion about who's approved it. And I want to be clear that the Attorney General's approval of this, which is often noted, or the Attorney General's approval of the model policy, is not necessarily a position of the Attorney General's office other than it is compliant with Vermont law. They do not analyze federal law. It's not their place. They don't take a position on any agency's policy in terms of whether they agree or disagree. They don't take any position on whether it's within the boundaries of the federal law. So that leads us up to 2021. The new council has a fair and impartial policing committee. Part of my discussions with a variety of stakeholders in this was actually really educating me, despite the amount of work that we have done within our department, about how little I really know about this. I mean, let's say it. I'm a white guy from Vermont. I don't have a lot of exposure. I have more exposure to people of color through my experience with the Air National Guard. I've got to explore parts of the world that have exposed me to new worlds. I got to think about the difference of what it means to be Romanian, Hungarian, but living in the same city. Things I've never experienced. So I'll acknowledge it. I've had a lot of privilege. I don't know about this, and I got to meet a lot of really cool people over the last 18 months who do know a lot about it, and I've taken a lot of counsel from them. And what I've got from more of them, unfortunately, to people who want to have my agency adopt this policy, what I've got from them is slow down and let people who know what they're talking about talk. And one of my friends, who is the director of fair and impartial policing for the state police, he's also local to Windham County, and a person of color himself, he said, "Why are you having this discussion when it's being had with far broader groups in the state? We have the racial disparities we call it RDAP because the acronym's too long, but racial disparities in the justice system. We have the Justice Reinvention Committee, who's discussing how is a variety of systemic racism occurring within Vermont's justice system, and how do we change those things? We have the Council, the Human Rights Commission, Migrant Justice, and a variety of other stakeholders talking about the specific fair and impartial policing policy. And so my question became, why do I have this separate policy as opposed to adopting the state policy? Well, the state policy is still broken in some ways, and there's desire to update it. So today, I'm also the co-vice chair of the Vermont Criminal Justice Council. So I actually get to be a part of many of these conversations and hear a lot of the new stuff, and today is the leading edge of the new stuff. So we had Julio Thompson, who's the chief of the civil rights enforcement for the Vermont Attorney General's office, come before the council today to discuss the issues identified within the migrant justice recommendations. Specifically on points 4 and 5. The issue that he takes in consideration of federal law, which does not normally come into the purview of the Attorney General's analysis, but because he was giving us his opinion and identifying models across the country as well where fair and impartial policing policies exist. The issue with number 4 is that it basically puts us in a position of saying we cannot tell people they cannot contact ICE or Border Patrol because it is a violation of 8 U.S.C. 1373 or 1644, I forget which one. And so what happens is under the Vermont statute, specifically Title 20, Section 2366, it states, nothing in this section is intended to prohibit or impede any public agency from complying with the lawful requirements of 8 U.S.C. 1373 and 1644 to the extent that state or local law enforcement policy or practice conflicts with the lawful requirements of those statutes. That policy or practice is, to the extent of the conflict, abolished. His interpretation was that if we do adopt that language, it abolishes our policy and sends us back to the state model policy. And it's like, okay, there's some legal mental Olympics going on here, but I get where you're going with that. The issue with number 5 is what he calls a savings clause, and I didn't capture the statute or statutes that he referenced, but fundamentally it's a similar issue, which is that you run a risk of either violating federal law or violating state law, which then abolishes the policy and sets you back to the state model policy. The other problem that he mentions with the savings clause, which is the number 5 recommendation, is that under labor law, and specifically having to do with employees potentially involved in misconduct, There is a standard, and I'm doing my best to regurgitate what he said today, but it's recorded and available online, so if anybody's interested, they can watch the council's meeting. When you establish in policy a standard of conduct, you want to establish what is acceptable. And if you remove that, you face the possibility or the risk that a person says, well, I wasn't aware, it's too vague, it's too broad, I wasn't trained appropriately, which then can undo a termination of an employee who may be acting in or against the agency's desire for appropriate conduct. So it also creates some additional employment liability issues as the employer, which as a agency that doesn't really receive tax funds except through towns with contracts, or for my building, which we receive county taxes to pay for the heat and electricity and whatnot, it becomes problematic with how do I continue paying my deputies, getting training, and trying to do the good things within the communities that we're doing if we eliminate federal funding. If they were to try and take on that tact again, we get about $250,000 in Windham County that goes to the town of Dummerston and other towns. It pays for some of our equipment. We just got 3 new speed counter devices that we help deploy throughout the towns to do speed studies and whatnot. So these things that could be affected. So I've talked a while and I'm starting to lose my train of thought, but that's kind of where we're at, is how do we thread the needle to ensure that people who are here legally or illegally, we don't care, but people who are here legally or illegally trust that they can come to us, that will support them and help them get access to services, and basically work through the process. While I have a policy that people say they have issues with the words. So that's where I'm at, but I'm happy. Did I answer your question?
I don't think so. So I heard what you said, but I guess one of my questions is, so with what you said, does that mean like Winooski or Norwich or even Brattleboro's recent updates? Are you claiming that the loopholes that they have closed are illegal? Possibly?
Possibly, yes.
And so, is it your, say, for all purposes, we decided, it came to light that these are not illegal. Would you be willing to adopt them?
The general concept, yes. I do disagree with some of the ACLU's proposed language, but that's more of a legal piece. But in terms of the loopholes, generally speaking, yes.
So like you're waiting,
if my attorney drafted the language to say we want due process for detainees, I'm completely supportive of that. I have concerns when the ACLU, who often sues the government, says to enact, they support, for example, number 5, the savings clause, and number 4, which we've been clearly told does violate federal law and state law. If they tell us they support that and we should do it, do we then open ourselves to liability to be sued by the ACLU?
The federal law that is potentially violated, for example, by item 4, is that law currently under review at the federal level?
So it has been challenged. When we talk about the federal level, I mean, we have the 3 branches of government. I have no idea what the legislature is doing with it, or Congress, I should say. I have no idea what the executive administration is doing with it, other than to say that they have relaxed and or withdrawn legal challenges, which were previously tried under a previous administration. The judiciary has had several challenges across the country. There's been 2 specifically in the Second Circuit, which is where Vermont cases are heard. One was in, I believe it was 2000, and one was last year, in which the Second Circuit ruled that these were constitutional laws. In other circuits, they were ruled not to be constitutional, and so this sets up for a Supreme Court challenge. and I can't afford a Supreme Court attorney. So if the town of Dummerston wants to support me in a challenge to the Second Circuit and the Supreme Court and pay for the attorney, I'm happy to run the fight. But this is a resource issue for me.
The caveat here that Margaret Justice has put in for 5, nothing in this policy is intended to violate federal law. How is that? What does that do to this situation?
Yeah, so actually I don't disagree with what I interpreted their intent to be, which is that they wanted the removal of reference to 8 U.S.C. 1373 and 1644 from all the policies. Just take it out. I was like, yeah, that's easy. Who cares? I mean, I don't reference laws generally speaking in all of my policies. And this comes back to, and I mean, Julio, brilliant guy. He is one attorney. And my experience with attorneys is that I can talk to 5 and have 5 opinions. However, he is also the chief of the Civil Rights Division, who this is their wheelhouse. Mm-hmm. So I place a lot of weight in his opinion. The idea of not indicating the statutes then means that somebody doesn't click the link or follow the breadcrumb to the next piece of language. And then including the language that it's not intended to violate federal policy. Well, we're kind of giving a wink and a head nod that we're tiptoeing around the issue. So to the point of, do I have a labor issue? That's something I have to talk to my attorney about. I'm not opposed to the idea of removing the reference to statute. He brings up a good point, but I'm also somewhat fortunate in that as sheriff, my employees are at-will employees, which most law enforcement officers in the state have union protection. I don't say that because of any other reason than when I'm no longer sheriff, the next sheriff could say, I'm not going to have any deputies. It's the prerogative of the sheriff to do that. So, while I don't think that would happen, there is a benefit there in that I probably don't face as many labor disputes as union entities would. Mm-hmm. It's a question that I just had tossed at me today, and I want to get an answer to it. So,
I've read some articles. The policy is currently under review, or
it is,
and they're trying to figure out that that statute. What is it? 1373, where law enforcement agents have the right to contact any other law enforcement agencies, and that seems to be the big issue that's causing problems with these policies. And do you know, is anybody working to find a way around that, or?
Lots of people are working to find their way around it. Who is doing what, I don't know.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I can't answer that.
So Putney will consider an article that's similar to, I think, these 5 proposals from Margaret Justice on their town meeting. And if that passes, which I would suppose it will, how will that affect your operations?
So if it's the language that I read, then it's an urging, so what I'm going to say is a non-binding motion to encourage the sheriff to adopt this policy. Similar to the town of Brattleboro having taken various positions over the years for a variety of values that they hold. So how does it affect operations if it remains as written? Then I don't think it changes much because, again, in practice, we're effectively doing what they're asking. And then it's really just me being the person of signing a policy or not signing a policy. If we are able to get viable change at the council level, at the state level, or at the federal level, to some of the the impotence to the policy, then it's far easier for me to adopt them. But I am looking out for the liability and viability of the agency.
So, Chris, you have a question?
Yeah.
And
Do you want to take this seat?
No, I just don't need to be behind you.
Sure.
So if I could take a moment just to respond to a couple things that you've been talking about. So it is my impression that 1373 is unconstitutional, and I believe that more circuit courts have ruled that way than not. So it's my understanding that the judicial process is grinding its slow wheels towards declaring this unconstitutional, in which case the federal government would not be able to withhold funds. I also wanted to speak to the Winooski budgetary withholding. It's also my impression that that budgetary withholding is relatively small. I don't remember the figures off the top of my head, somewhere in the 4 digits. And that 1 or 2 years following, I believe that was rescinded, and they got somewhere in the 5 digits of funding reinstated. So it's my understanding that, and I'll follow up with more info on this, but it's my understanding that Winooski did not suffer a budgetary negative effect. I wanted to ask specifically, well, let me get through some terms also real quick. So you mentioned that the Vermont has a statewide fair and impartial policing policy. There are loopholes in that policy which allow coordination with ICE and Border Patrol by law enforcement officers. That's the piece that Migrant Justice is trying to close those loopholes. And those loopholes have been exploited by law enforcement officers in Vermont to circumvent the general prohibition on that type of contact. It's also clear that local departments are allowed to adopt stronger protections than the model policy, but they are not legally allowed to weaken it. And so, there's 2 lobes that I wanted to talk about. One is that the Windham County Sheriff's Office has not adopted the current Vermont FIP verbatim, and separately, that Vermont FIP has not closed the loopholes, nor has the Windham County Sheriff's Office closed the loopholes. So, are you aware that your current FIP policy, as it's currently stated, does not meet the state standards, or do you believe that it does?
It's my understanding that it does, and that has been acknowledged by the Attorney General's office.
Okay, so I understand that the Attorney General did approve that. It seems to me, when I give a close read of the 2 policies, it seems to me that the office, and I understand this was the office of your predecessor, but it seems to me that the policy was watered down and made weaker. There's an omission of being courteous and professional. There's an addition of officers will not intentionally engage in bias policing. There's a few of these little words that are added in there that really cause some serious concern and doubt. So I'm curious about what you think about the legality of your current policy, given those potential weak points.
I'll restate, I believe it fits the standard of the state law, and it's received approval from the Attorney General.
I will just say that by my read, the Vermont policy sounds more ethical than the Windham County Sheriff's Office policy.
so, we do have limits to how long
Sure, I have some other questions.
people, what?
I just have some other questions.
Right.
What's the limit?
5 minutes, actually, is the policy. We can let you go longer with the consent of the board. But
Did the board consent to the hefty introduction? I wasn't allowed
what?
to.
I can't hear you.
I feel like the introduction was quite long, so.
Yes, well, we had invited him to
Yeah,
respond to the issues that you brought up in your prior 2 visits.
Right.
So you've had the stage for, a while. So
Okay.
if you can,
I think maybe if there's some quick points you would like to make, I think that as far as I'm concerned, it's fine to take a couple more minutes.
yeah, sure. Okay?
That's okay with me.
Yeah.
Are you aware that the loopholes can be and have been exploited by officers in Vermont?
Yes.
Do you acknowledge that all current and future deputies and officers of the Windham County Sheriff's Office are free and able to utilize those loopholes currently to engage in biased policing and discriminatory practices? If it's happened already, can it currently still happen?
It takes out of context the other policies that my department has that aren't necessarily connected to FIP, but have underlying value systems connected to it. So you made a point about my policy removing being courteous and compassionate. It's because it's redundant to another policy that we have. So similar to the state police, taking the statewide model policy and breaking it into 3 and going into far greater detail in certain areas, we already have that detail captured elsewhere.
Do the records you reviewed when stating that your department has not engaged in communicating with ICE reflect that this issue hasn't come up or that you have a commitment to the issue?
I don't understand the question.
I guess I'm wondering, has the problem not occurred and so you don't have any records of it, or does your department have a commitment to not collaborating with ICE?
I'm not
It's
sure I
not-
can answer that question.
It's not that important, you can move on. You've stated that you support the closing of these loopholes in your policy if they're legal, is that correct?
Yes.
That's great, thank you. If an officer of the Windham County Sheriff's Office uses one of these loopholes, does the town of Dummerston have any recourse against that officer currently? Or would they be acting within the existing written policy and therefore no recourse would be available?
Well, I think that a town would have any recourse it's entitled to under law. They're employees of my department. But that said, I think that's really a legal question that you're asking.
I guess what I'm asking really is policy only for training purposes, or is policy also for accountability purposes?
It's for both.
Great. What assurance does Dummerston have that if a new sheriff were elected or new officers were hired, that they would continue to not coordinate with ICE or Border Patrol under these loopholes?
None.
Thanks. Since personnel and elected office holders regularly change, do you agree that written policies and standards of operations are the only way to offer an assurance to Dummerston that the Windham County Sheriff Office will in the future not coordinate with ICE?
No.
What other ways are there?
I'm not sure there's another way, because the basic premise of an election of a sheriff means that the sheriff can come in with whatever policies. We just saw 2 drastic policy shifts between presidents.
So the policy would be the most stable way of ensuring the practice?
No, because the sheriff establishes the policy manual. I've adopted the policies that we currently have as mine, but a new sheriff can walk in just as easily as they say, I'm not renewing any commission, I'm not renewing any policy.
So you
They'd
could
be
also,
mandated to the state model policy, but the state model policy includes the same language.
so you could also adopt the state model policy verbatim instead of the policy you have now at any time?
Correct.
Great. Would you consider adopting
can
the
we-
wording? I just have one more important
all
question.
right, one more.
Would you consider adopting the wording to close these 5 loopholes in your policy in order to maintain a contract with Dummerston?
Would I consider adopting the or these points to maintain a contract with Dummerston? No.
Thanks. I didn't bring any documents, articles documenting ICE's human rights abuses, but I must remind us that they exist.
Interrupt you now.
we must not send people into the hands of ICE without due process.
I think we've got another question
Thank
on the
you.
floor.
Thank you for some amount of time.
Yep.
With all due respect, I think your line of questioning to the sheriff is putting the man on trial for something he has not committed. This man has been researching diligently, not only through the state, with other sheriff's departments and higher-ups, including his own attorney and the attorney general, to subject him to that. I think you need to apologize to that man. He has been very diligent on trying to get this resolved. It's a slow friggin' process, and I think your efforts for one sheriff's department, you need to go further up the line in state government to get the federal government to get things moving. So please, back off, sir. Thank you.
May I respond just briefly that if I weren't so rushed, I think that my tone would have been a little nicer, so.
Okay.
Can I say one thing?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I'm here for conversation. I don't have the answers. I don't try to make it up. I try to be open. We're trying to do the good fight. I appreciate people willing to come and have a dialogue. It's how we work as neighbors. It's how we work as a community. So I actually really appreciate all of this. We haven't got to see people in person very much over the last 18 months. And I'll take criticism. I'm happy to meet with other people if they want to talk about it. Might not be the domain of the select board meeting, but certainly I've held counsel of the public. I do have the Windham County Sheriff's Advisory, which is a panel I established this year for hearing these types of issues. So I do ask if people from the town of Dummerston wants to discuss it, contact my advisory. We have a civilian chair separate from me. I don't run the advisory, who is more than open to it. The information is on our website. So just want to say thank you.
Do you have one more question that you would like to ask?
No, I would just say that it sounds like he is willing to adopt the 5 loopholes if they're legal, and I appreciated hearing that. And I believe that the loopholes should be closed to protect people who have not yet been wronged, even if it hasn't happened yet. I'm not claiming that the sheriff's office has done bad things, but we still have a duty to protect people by the letter of the law and in a policy that is for both training and accountability.
I'd just like to say that I think I'd like to thank the sheriff for coming and being so open, laying out the history and the willingness to find the right balance and the right solutions for our community. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for a significant amount of your time. I know that you guys are busy and we're coming to budget season, so I appreciate the opportunity to speak to this. I am passionate about it, but also tried to be realistic with the constraints we have. So, thank you.
Can I ask you one question, Mark?
Shoot.
We'll go right off topic. We'll
Shoot.
leave it the other way. How are we working out with the dog? The animal control budget?
I quit.
Now you're talking.
All right, so the animal control program has been awesome. I'm going to
Okay.
be far briefer on this conversation.
Oh,
It's been
great.
awesome.
Okay, great.
That's my opinion. I'd actually like to hear your opinion, but I can't tell you how busy Ashley is. She is running around at risk of using a pun like a chicken with her head cut off. It's been amazing. The volume. I did not expect the volume to be as much as it has been. We have been going a bit broader than the original scope of dogs, but that said, it's generally with the idea to help the town with the various issues around animals. don't know any specific stats for Dummerston. I didn't come prepared to speak about it today in terms of the agreement. So we committed to starting the program July 1st. The town of Dummerston was part of the discussion. It did not, actually I know it didn't.
We were at it, but
Yeah,
we're not in
withdrawal at the
review.
last minute.
Right, but we were wondering if we could get an idea maybe by November as we
Yeah.
work through the budget.
So the, I spoke with Terry at great length about this. In short, we had the member program, which is basically we take the cost of the program, divide it by the member towns. And then we have the non-member program, which is basically it would be an hourly rate that would contribute into the program. With an intention of incentivizing towns to become members as opposed to use it piecemeal, which has operational expenses added to it. July 1st, I thought I was going to have my MOU in place from my attorney. Like everybody else, everyone's busy, and my attorneys were incredibly busy. And I spoke with my attorney 2 weeks ago, and he said, "Oh yeah, it's done. We're going to send it over." And then I called him the next day and said, "Where is it?" And he said, "You don't have that? Well, let me check with Joe." And then I checked with him a few days later. He said, "Hey, Joe sent it over." I said, "No, he didn't." So I'm playing the game of where's the MOU, because the problem for me is I'm not charging towns until I have the MOU in place. So we've been offering the service for free. I mean, retroactively we will bill, but for free until we have that agreement in place. So that's why I'm being hesitant to speak out with other towns saying we're going to do more, because I'm carrying the cost and the burden. So we want to stand by our commitment, and we also have to have an agreement under state law for me to be able to have a contract. So.
Okay, so we'll wait until you get your,
I'm working really hard on getting it.
okay.
The last 2 weeks have been insane, so I haven't done anything the last 2 weeks towards animal control.
Okay, thank you for updating us.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Any other questions? No. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you again for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Sheriff,
Let's see.
catch up to you tomorrow.
All right.
Watch where you're walking.
All right. Would you like to give the road foreman's report?
Oh, yes. There has been road grading going on and leaf blowing that seems like in conjunction. And I'm sure, given the summer that we had, it will continue.
Are they using the new leaf blower now?
I don't think
believe
that.
so. Yeah, no, it's still the old one that was on it, I saw the
Yeah.
other day.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what was on the old
Yeah.
one. I was behind it this morning.
And it is brief, and that is the report.
I love Revenue report. Okay, any questions for our standard road foreman?
Yeah.
Or person? Okay, under correspondence for information, is there anything you'd like to discuss? Okay, under discussion and or action, we have Daniel Cray from the Conservation Commission is moving out of town and has submitted his resignation. What would you like to do?
I'd like to move that we accept the resignation of Dan.
Do we need to do a motion, seeing as it's an appointed position?
I thought because it was an appointed, we did, where if an elected official resigns, then we don't. That was my understanding.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I'll second your motion then.
Okay, any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. So, we have Daniel Garing is interested in joining the Planning Commission.
I'll make a motion to accept the appointment of Daniel Garing to the Planning Commission.
I'll second that.
Any discussion? And this would this be to fill in a term or just
I think it
until
would be
town?
till town meeting.
Town meeting, okay, great. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, all right. We have a letter of interest for an auditor position. Ray Harris, who lives on Tucker Reed Road, is interested in working as an auditor. I could get in touch with him and ask him to come to a little before our next meeting,
Well, I think would be a good
Yeah.
idea.
maybe
Yeah.
15 minutes.
50.
Okay. All right.
Well, okay,
I'll do
so
that.
Yeah.
6:45? All right.
Yeah.
That sounds good.
Okay, great. Under new business, Charlotte Annis, our treasurer, town treasurer, is getting more and more invoices and bills that are payable within 2 weeks instead of the 30 days that used to be. And sometimes that doesn't quite fit into our 2-week schedule of approving warrants. She has suggested that for some of the routine bills that come in that might be on that 2-week schedule, that if she contacts a select board member and goes ahead and pays them, and then those would be ratified at our next meeting. What do members think about that?
Sounds good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it would save us any late fees or her having to go
Yeah.
away,
Yeah.
call and waive late fees.
Yes, I think she was thinking she'd do this where late fees would be involved.
Right.
And it sounded like it was like reoccurring payments that we're like aware of and,
Yeah,
yeah.
More with the cycles of when they come in and when we pay. Do we want a motion for that?
yes.
Okay, I'll make a motion to approve the treasurer to pay bills off-cycle by approval of a select board member.
Okay,
I'll second that.
any discussion? Yes,
Would it be beneficial to have 2 select board members contacted? So when you go to ratify it, you could show that 2 members did agree on the action taken.
I think, what do members think? I think
Just a
one
question.
member would be sufficient. I think,
Yeah, usually we,
For,
yeah,
you know, this
Something
whole-
like this, I think. If, again, if it's a reoccurring payment, I think that we're
Yes.
already aware, and so therefore, I think one of us is
Right.
probably adequate.
This wouldn't be
right.
anything out of.
It's like an Aflac
ordinary.
payment that you see every month or every pay warrant.
It's just a question
Yeah.
to CYA.
Okay,
Okay.
any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, great. Let Charlotte know. Let's see, the War Memorial Certificate of Deposit is up for renewal. What would you like to do?
I'll make a motion to have Charlotte renew the War Memorial CD for 1 year.
I'll second it.
Okay, any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, we can let Charlotte know that. Let's see. All right, we have an applicant that's interested in serving on the Energy Committee, Mark Cracom. What would you like to do?
I'll make a motion to approve appoint Mark Cracom to the Energy Committee until town meeting.
I'll second it.
Okay, any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, you've been unanimously appointed to serve on the Energy Committee.
Never sweat begins.
Thanks very much for
Thank
being
you.
willing.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see, the Regional Emergency Management Committee appointments are needed.
I'm still working on trying to find somebody.
Okay,
Did we decide that there was going to be a stipend? We discussed that, didn't we?
we
We're
Yes.
talked about
We're
it.
talking about it, but
Yeah. We haven't decided on
I
that.
think we
Yeah.
need maybe to talk about that in our
Budget,
budget
yeah.
meeting.
session.
Yeah, yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. Um,
So we as the group are the EMDs.
Mm.
So we are the number 1 spot. We need a number 2. We really need a number 1 and a number 2.
Yeah,
Because we will have 2 voting members.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
you know, we as the group are already slated on Alyssa's as number one. She's hoping to, we were supposed to get back to her to the 27th, I believe it was,
Yes,
for the
next
number two
Wednesday.
slot, so that they could have the first meeting, November 16th,
Something like that.
18th, somewhere in there. So, so it's a matter of Maria's working to try to find somebody, but we need somebody to go to this first meeting,
On November 16th.
or whatever date that Alyssa comes up with for the regional meeting.
Okay. Well, let's see. We could draw straws, think of a number between 1 and 10. Would anyone like to, if we don't have someone that we can appoint by then, anyone willing to go to this first meeting? Okay, we'll bring it up at our next,
Okay, we'll bring it up on the next one.
okay, let's see, November 16th. If, I don't want to let everybody off the hook, but if, between you and me, I could go, maybe.
Okay.
All right.
Be nice.
Yes, Mark.
Have you thought about, back when we had the Vermont Yankee drills, have you thought about asking one of those participants that was in the town office?
Yes, we have.
Okay. I was always stationed down in corporate headquarters, so
That was our first thought that we had. And we checked it out. Let's
any
see.
interest?
I'm still working on it.
She's still working on it.
God
Let's
bless you.
see. We have highway FEMA loan.
I have an update on that.
Oh, great.
So are you talking about, so last meeting I had, where we're talking about the line of credit and the loans?
No, that's down, let's see.
Well, it
Oh,
kind of
yes,
goes,
that
both-
is it.
That
the
is it,
same
right?
thing.
Yep.
It's the community bank.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, so I checked it, last meeting I said that, we were discussing whether we should have a loan or a line of credit and for $200,000 and what that might look like. I did check in with Charlotte and her advice as the town treasurer was that, we should take out the line of credit, now for $200,000. That would, be for a 1-year, term. That was her advice.
Okay, and this is, let's see, for repairing all the storm damage from July 29th.
Right.
There was about $200,000 or $170,000 worth of
Work that we know, yeah.
was done. And FEMA will reimburse us for 75% of that?
Yes.
We've paid most of those bills and we might wait a year for FEMA to.
Sure, Charlotte's update says that, FEMA's saying that they're paying the towns as soon as possible, but obviously, as we all know, that, we can't rely on
Well, here's
as soon as
the,
possible as with any timeline.
Right. Right.
And so,
we are up to where we need to be on the FEMA paperwork, okay? I'm in the portal with her. We were supposed to, once we got the portal up, be assigned a FEMA rep and within 5 days, but Charlotte did double check on that. I think you got everybody got the email. We may not get that rep for a few weeks, so hence the line of credit to hold us because we've taken it out of highway and we're headed into a winter.
right.
Okay. So, good.
Weren't we waiting on current rates?
We've got them 2.25 for a line of credit and a 1.85. They didn't change.
They didn't change.
On the fully dispersed loan, that's both on 200,000. I think it's in the
Yeah.
paperwork.
So, could we have a motion to allow Charlotte to take out a line of credit
Make a motion for Charlotte to complete the paperwork for a line of credit at Community Bank for financing for the highway at a rate of 2.25%.
I'll second it.
Okay, any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great. Okay, so let's just sign that right now. All right. Okay, let's see. Okay, there, we received a letter from the Dummerston Community Center Board of Trustees. They would like to do some work on this building that's, pretty more expensive than what they've usually come to, when they've come to us for town help. I would think this would be something we'd
For budget?
put in our budget.
Yeah.
They're not,
Yep.
they're not looking for us to write a
Check tonight? No.
tonight, but I think they are thinking that we'd consider it in the budget that we're working on. Okay. Community bank proposal for financing. That is
That's what we
That's what we just
did.
did, kind of in conjunction.
some residents on East West Road and Schoolhouse Road would like to plant a pollinator garden on some of the land by the brook. And they seem to just want, because it's on town property, they'd like permission to do that.
Is this area, we're waiting for the state of Vermont and FEMA to discuss the stabilization of the banks?
Might be.
I think so.
Yes.
I mean, I think it's a great idea, but I would
Yeah.
like to wait and see what the state has as far as their environmental engineering come down.
Yeah,
What should be done?
we suggest that, or let them know that we seem to be, think it's a good idea,
Yeah.
but we wouldn't want
To start
their
something.
Yeah.
work to
Yeah.
be,
Because it may not fit into the plans
Yeah.
of
yeah, but,
whatever the state decides
Yes.
that needs to be done
right,
to actually stabilize it.
yeah, so maybe by spring, we might do
Yeah.
something, and that
Right.
would be a good time for working on this. So I can get back to them on that.
Okay.
And we have a special events permit, so we have to become the liquor commission.
I'll make a motion that we recess the meeting and convene as a liquor control board.
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, this is for a special event at the Scott Farm on, let's see, not October.
11, it's November
Yes,
5th.
November 5th.
I'll make a motion
4
to,
PM to
10.
10 PM. Okay,
I'll make a motion to approve the special event permit for Eden Ice Cider for the event at the Scott Farm on November 5th from 4 to 10 PM.
Oh, second that.
okay. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
And I will abstain. Okay,
I'll make a motion that we adjourn as a liquor control board and reconvene the regular meeting.
Second that.
all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Is there any other business? Regular business? Any last words?
Got a question.
Yes?
I know FEMA is gonna try to cut a check to reimburse us for the storm damage.
Mhm.
I know some of the culverts are temporary because they have to be dug up and concrete box culverts put in. Is that gonna be covered by FEMA? Or is that gonna wind up coming out of our pocket?
That's a good question, and those are the kind of questions that Lee will have for the FEMA rep when he comes in. He'll be assigned to a specific person that'll go through all these with us.
Okay, because when I was talking with the female engineer after the work was done to open the road back up. She says these are temporary
Yes.
and they need to have a concrete box culvert put in. That's why I raised the question.
Yeah.
So you'll find that out.
We'll find that out. It's
Yep.
pretty methodical system that they have in place of how we do things. And that's why we have our wrap, and then it'll go from there and we'll work through the process. But that's why it's gonna be ended up a year before it, yeah.
So do you at least say another 12 months?
Well, we're talking about the federal government, so we just, when the check comes, it comes. That's.
No, I'm not talking
Yeah.
about the money. I'm saying it'll probably take another 12 months for all the
Well,
yakking back and forth.
No, I mean, well, I hate to give a deadline to it, but I mean, we'll do it, he'll do it as it's feasible and as we're given the go-ahead with it. I mean, that's the best way to, do you know what I'm
Play it
saying?
by
We're-
ear.
Right, one step at a time, that's the motto with this, one step at a time.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. All right, so I'd like to have an executive session
Yep.
for a personnel.
So I'll make a motion that we enter executive session as provided in Vermont Statute Title I, Chapter 5, subsection 2, 313A, number 4, a personnel matter.
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We are back in regular session. We have no decisions coming out of our executive session. So,
I'll make a motion, we adjourn.
I'll second it.
there we are.
We're out. We're done. Great.